Good morning, everyone. It's Deborah here. I'm going to show you a lesson on the apple and pear. Now, the reason why I'm doing the apple and pear is I know a lot of my students have already done it, if not all of them, but it's always good to have a refresher. And I myself do still lives periodically for a refresher. The reason why we do the apple and pear is because the circle is the first thing a child learns to draw, because they learn to draw from their extremities in. So in other words, their gross motor to their fine motor. And because we want to have success, because it's fast and you can do it within an hour and a half, we always have our students do this first so they see a full lesson in completion and success. I also do it for my adult classes because it is a really good lesson to learn. I did this video yesterday, completely did an apple and pear, and found that when my alarm on my phone went off for me to take my meds, it shut the camera down, so half of it was lost. So I'm going to do it again. Bear with me. I've never done this before. I'm very techno-challenged. And it's, something I never thought I'd have to do. I've never actually talked through a painting before, so this will be interesting. What we teach at Acorn is really about the foundations of the art, the science of light and the math of drawing and all those things. And with every lesson that I do, I will give you one of those things. The apple and pear is the lesson about light. Now, to start off first, I take alizarin crimson and yellow ochre, and I took a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I made kind of a burnt orange, and I'm going to thinly cover the entire canvas with it. You want to make sure that it's thin because we're going to wipe most of this off, so it's kind of almost like a coffee staining. You don't want this color to interfere with your colors that you make for your apple and pear. Now, my students are used to using charcoal. I haven't used charcoal in a drawing on a canvas for a long time. As a matter of fact, I don't usually paint on canvas. I usually paint on wood. But to start out, canvas is good. It's cheap. It's easy to get. So I got a thin wash on this whole thing, right? And now I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to wipe it down. This creates a tone. In art history, this tone was called a grisaille. It was used under the Mona Lisa. It was used under many of the early paintings. And the reason why they use a grisaille is so that you don't have the whiteness showing underneath it. You have a tone, and so you're not fighting that. It's worst case scenario is to get through an entire painting and then you have these little white spots where you miss the paint. The grisaille supports that. Not only that, but a grisaille will also, if you use the right tone, in this case, the apple and pear, it's a green apple and a yellow pear. This color won't interfere with color mixing, number one. And number two, the background is going to have a lot of like purplish kind of shadows. So that will support, the blue and the purple will be supported by the complement of the orange of the grisaille. So anyways, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a very small ground down brush. These are my brushes here. I use red sables, either Old Holland or Blick's Master Stroke. We don't use these at the studio. I find a nice ground down one. We don't use these at the studio because they are very expensive and very delicate. If you have a, what do you call it? The white boar hair brushes, those are good. Don't use squirrel. Don't use the floppy kind. Don't use watercolor. Make sure they're for oil or acrylic. Something a little stiffer is usually helpful for beginners. So anyway, I use a ground down brush because to me it's kind of like a pencil, And I love to draw. A lot of times artists will just jump in with color and so forth, which is great, but not for beginners. Beginners get a little confused by that. Beginners know how to, they understand drawing. So if you teach them to draw properly, they'll always have that as a foundation. So this is the photo I'm working from. Okay, I'm kind of stuck on here it is right there. All right. I will post this photo with this video if you want to work from this photo, or you could set up your own apple and pear because in reality, what I'm going to teach you from this can be transferred to any still life object that you have. Any object, actually. It's a little tougher with faces, which we will do at another time. But any still life object will follow these rules. So I'm going to use the four edges of your canvas are actually the most important lines your drawings will have, because how it relates to what's in the middle is really important. So if I made my apple and pear really tiny in the middle, which sometimes a lot of kids will do, you have all this big space here. So I'm going to follow exactly what I have on this photograph as far as spacing. So the apple is round. I like to find the flat planes of it instead of making just a complete circle, because the world is made up of flat planes, you know. Even round objects are consistent of flat planes. So I like to find those because in the long run, they're going to help me find the form, which is something you'll hear a lot of. So that's about the size of the apple. I'm leaving room down here for the shadow. The pear starts at the apple, about this far down, and it is slightly lower than the apple. And I'm just going to start first with a circle just for the kids to make this a little easier. I'm doing this video for both children and adults, so I'm going to try to accommodate both of them in my language. So there's the first circle, and the second one is down here. A lot of you remember having done this as a child. The reason why I want you to try it again is because some of you, especially my teenage students, you haven't done this since you were probably 5. So it'd be nice to try it again and see what you get and compare them. So now I have the two figures, the two objects drawn, and I'm going to take a little bit of mineral spirits that's still on the rag, and I'm going to erase this part. Some of you that are used to just using charcoal, you may find that you like drawing this way in the start of your painting. I do. I prefer it. It's less messy. You can erase it easier. You never have to worry about making mistakes. Okay, so now for the shadow. So the shadow is about here. It goes over this way. There's a little wrinkle in the cloth. It's sitting on a cloth, a table with a cloth on it. So then the cloth goes this way. And then there's a bit of a shadow here, and like that. And then the top part of the cloth kind of breaks right about here. And here, okay. You don't really see a horizon in this in the original, but you do see the back of the shadow, which kind of creates a horizon, sort of. So I'm just going to put that in like that. All right, there's a little bit of a line here too. Okay, so that's our basic drawing. There are stems. There's one here. Stems are really interesting in fruit. I used to do these fruit all the time, called Deborah's Lunchtime Specials. I'd walk down to the studio every morning before my classes. I'd do a painting. I'd stop at the fruit market on Atlantic Ave, grab a couple of fruit, keep walking, get to the studio, do a painting in about an hour, put it up on the wall for $75, and then I'd eat the fruit for lunch. So they were called Deborah's Lunchtime Specials. I really enjoyed that time. I really miss being able to walk down to the studio. All right, so here we have our drawing. From there, we're going to talk about the 6 lights. Now, the 6 lights are a theory that came down from Isaac Newton. It's not anything I made up. It's not anything Jack made up. And as a matter of fact, Jack went to Boston University to get his degree in art, and this is where he learned it. So when you take a light and you shine it on an object, you get 6 different lights. Now, in this particular picture, the light is coming from this direction. So when you're walking through a museum and you're looking at paintings and you see these, like especially like the old Dutch masters, and you're looking at the still lifes, your brain knows where that light's coming from. And why is that? Well, what's interesting about it is you already have in your mind a preconceived notion of how light is. But if you paint it wrong, your brain's going to think there's something wrong and I can't figure out what it is because you don't have the language about what light is. So now I'm going to give you that language. So if the light's coming from this area, that means this side and this side are the light side, and this side and this side are the dark side. Now there's a line that separates the light side from the dark side, and it comes down like this on this particular object. It comes down like this and stops there. That line is called the shadow's edge. The shadow's edge determines a lot of things. Number one, it determines how close the light source is. The sharper the shadow's edge, the closer the light. The sharper the shadow's edge, the least amount of light. In other words, there's no ambient light. The further away, the softer it is. So right now, just to be able to separate it for you, I'm just going to put in 2 lines. So we have light side, dark side, shadow's edge, cast shadow. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 of the lights. Now the other lights will be living inside here and inside here. So in the light side will be the highlight. Highlight is a direct line to the light source. And if you look at the apple, you will see that the highlight is right there. Okay, so that means if you were to take like a piece of yarn and you stuck it on that spot and you drew and you extended it out, it would go to the center of the light source. Now sometimes the highlight is low, like here. And if it's low, that means your light's down here. This one's here, so that means the light is here. And your brain automatically knows that as a viewer, but it doesn't know that as a painter, and that's what I'm going to show you. So the first thing we're going to do, and even though I don't physically paint this way, this is a beginner's class. If I were to show you a painting that I was doing, you would be completely lost because I'm calculating everything in my head as I go, and I do paint very fast, and I mix all my colors ahead of time, and I just wham, 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 okay? That wouldn't help you. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the teacher and show you step by step how to do this. So we're going to separate the light side from the dark side. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mix cadmium yellow medium with a little bit of ultramarine blue. And we will get this color. Okay, so that is your light side color. Now, if you're a child and you're working at home, you're not going to have the cadmium colors. So you're just going to use the hues, and you're going to use the same color. So if you're used to the studio, you're going to use your light yellow and your dark blue. Okay, and for the dark side, I used the same thing, only I used a little more blue. And that's going to be this side. Now this seems really dark at first. I might actually lighten it up a little bit. You can't really tell a color until you put them side by side. Even on my palette. My palette's background is a gray, so it's hard to tell the relationship. Color and value and temperature are all relationships to each other, so you have to test them out. So I'm going to say this one is just a little too dark. And I'm going to add some more yellow. So I have to get that out. If you hear squeaking, that's my cat in the back. My cat is very quiet, but she will squeak at the crows when they're out in the garden. And I have a big glass door behind me, so she's seeing the crows in the garden, so she's squeaking a little bit. Okay, so I'm using the Utrecht paint because I really like Utrecht paint. I've used Utrecht paint for years. I also use Old Holland and Williamsburg. But for the cadmiums, I use Utrecht. Partly because it's a little cheaper and partly because it's really good paint. It measures up, you know. But Old Holland and Williamsburg will have some other colors that you can't get in the same quality with Utrecht. Okay, so I just put in a little more yellow in that. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, now we may darken up the center here because it does seem to have that in the original. But for the most part, because I'm trying to keep it simple for you, we're going to use this color here. Okay, so now there's this thing called on the form. We use this term a lot at Acorn. On the form basically means following the planes. Pretend you're the little ant and you're walking across this vast desert of an apple, and you find yourself, you're going down, you're going across, you're coming this way. Imagine those planes in your head. That is so important. It's the one consistent thing that has never changed in all my years of painting, is being able to imagine myself there. And that's what happens when you do that. The person inside you is what comes out in the painting. Okay, so I'm just going to cover this real quickly. Notice how I'm holding my brush. You can get planes a lot easier if you hold your brush like a brush as opposed to a pencil. A pencil is good for a line, and you can do a nice gesture like this, but it'll take you forever. It'll also give you a line, you know. For me, I like to find the mass. When you get to the underside, you know, it goes under, so you want to paint it in that way. Now, some of you might think, wow, that's really dark. What are you going to do? It looks kind of flat. Well, it will look much better once we get those reflected lights in there. Now we're going to do the light side. Just a quick knock-in. We call these knock-ins. There we go. Don't be afraid of your edges. Go right up to the edge. There. And then this up here is also light side, so I'm going to throw a little bit up there. Okay, so there's our light side, our dark side, and our shadow's edge, 3 of the 6 lights. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the reflected lights. So there's a couple of steadfast rules. Reflected light has a lot of rules. The first one being that reflected lights are always found on your dark side, and they are always darker than anything you have on your light side, which means your reflected light cannot be as light as this color here, because if it is, it's going to flip the object. So we want to make sure that we have a color that's the right temperature, it's generally a little cooler, the right temperature and in the right spots. And it's also good to, in your mind, figure out where is that reflected light coming from. Now on this, the reflected light is down here. There's one here. This here is a window light because I had a window across, so that's actually a completely different light. And there's a little one here, okay? Notice how it gets darker up here and it's darker down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this color and this color and we're going to mix it together and see what we get. I'll show you my palette in a minute. It's kind of impossible for me to set up the whole thing so you can see the whole thing at once because of my limitations to how I have to paint due to my spine. Okay, so there we go. So the reflected light, it has a line that goes like this and it attaches over here. Now, the reason why that reflected light is there, I know because I took the photograph, is because this line right here is the edge of the table that I was photographing it on. So that's going to just be a little tiny bit of a glow down here. Now, reflected light is a bouncing light. So what's happening is the way we got this reflected light was the light was coming from here. It hit the table, or, you know, the cloth, and then bounced back up. Now, sometimes that bounce will then bounce again onto a cast shadow, creating another reflected light. And the more that it bounces, the darker the light gets. So that's a really good thing to remember. The more that it bounces, the darker the light gets. All right, so there's one there, and there's one here that kind of comes from around. And there's a little one here. And there's one right about here. Now there's the light, that blue light that I was talking about, is right about here. Now that's going to be fairly light as well as this, but maybe a little bit darker than the highlight that's going to be in there. But yeah, it's just a little bit of a blue because it's from the light outside. Blue light is an outdoor light is a blue light because it's cool. Incandescent light is a warm light. So you'll find that your highlights on an indoor light will always be kind of a yellowy color, and your highlights from a window will always be kind of blue. Now, my shadow's edge isn't as sharp as I had it there, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to soften that just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to add a little more of this because it still feels like the dark side's just a little too dark in some areas. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this here, like that. And for the moment, I'm just going to leave it. It's okay to see strokes. You don't want to have it completely without strokes. A lot of my work, people always think that it does, but if you were to see it up close, you would see that it does definitely have strokes that you can see. Okay, now the light side seems a little too dark to me as well, so I'm just going to lighten that up a little. There's this weird discoloration right about here on the apple. It's not one of the lights, it's just a color transition that's just a defect in the apple or whatever, you know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that down there like that. When you're working from things that are from life, that are natural, not man-made, you're going to have imperfections, and that's kind of what makes it feel more real, is to apply those imperfections. And this is a little cooler. It kind of connects over to that reflected light. There we go. Okay, now the highlight is about here. The highlight I made with lemon yellow and a little bit of white. Now, lemon yellow we don't use at the studio. It's a good color to have, though. We don't use it at the studio because it gets too confusing for the kids, and they don't quite use it right. They don't understand temperatures yet. But if you are an adult and you're painting at home, get yourself some lemon yellow. There's also a little bit of it right up here. I have shaky hands, so I have to support myself. There. Okay, now we have that darkness that I was talking about in the center and here, so I'm going to take some of that original dark side color that I had, see if that is enough. I might need to add some blue to it. So yeah, I'm going to add a little tiny bit of ultramarine blue. I'm going to pop that in right there. I'm going to pop a little bit of it in down here. Painting is seeing, you know. It's all about analyzing what you're seeing, and understanding the 6 lights makes that seeing a lot easier because you know it's seeing with knowledge. You know, sometimes people think, oh, still life's so boring. You know, I want to express myself. And that's okay. But it's easier to express yourself out of your head once you've done enough still lifes to give you the knowledge that you need to do that. And I'm going to darken just a little tiny bit right where the stem is going to be. There. Okay, so there's your apple. Now, let's go over to the pear. Let's see. I'm just going to move it over a little because I'm at an odd angle here. Okay, so for the pear, the colors that I mixed were cadmium yellow medium, and I took some of the grisaille color actually and mixed it in for my dark side. So I'm going to pop that in right now. Now it's a little hard to see, but I'm going to show you the difference. There's your dark side. Now the light side I used lemon yellow and cadmium yellow medium. That's the light side. So now, see how that wasn't a dark until I added that, and now suddenly it's a dark? It's important to remember that it's all about relationships, the relationship between this to that. This is a light until I put that next to it, and then that became a dark. And temperature too, you know, temperatures change in that way as well. Now there's, right about here, there's a huge shadow from the apple. So I'm going to leave that open, and I'm just going to knock in, there's that word again, I'm just going to knock in a dark side here. Now the stroke and the form, excuse me, goes this way around as opposed to the apple that was kind of going this way. So this is, we're going to go this way around. Cover over that shadow's edge because you don't want that line showing. And leave that space for the shadow, cast shadow from the pear, from the apple. And we're just going to bring that right down to simplify it. Okay, now for the cast shadow, I'm going to take a little bit of the grisaille color and a little bit of the dark side color. And I'm just going to knock that in there. Don't be afraid to go up next to your apple. You can see how shaky my hands are. My hands are shaky because of my lupus. But I still can, you know, work through it. One time I broke my arm, my right arm, and my wrist, right wrist. Did it in the parking lot at Acorn. It was kind of funny, actually. I was telling Lexi about black ice and how to be careful. She was little at the time. And just as I said that, I slipped on the ice, and I fell, and I broke my arm. And I couldn't, we were going home, but Jack was teaching the next class. But I couldn't drive myself because I drove a stick, and Lexi couldn't drive because she was too young. So I went back into the studio. I said to Jack, I broke my arm. He goes, how do you know you broke your arm? I said, I can tell I broke my arm. He goes, if you broke your arm, you'd be screaming right now. I said, you obviously haven't broken a bone. I said, I've broken lots of bones. I know when I've broken a bone. He didn't believe me. And I said, and he said, well, I can't drive you because I can't leave the kids. So I taught with him for 2 hours, threw a sling around my neck to support it, got to the hospital. Sure enough, I had broken my arm, and was in a cast for 6 weeks. It was actually a very strange night. There were so many people in there with broken arms because of the black ice. And so I had a cast on for 6 weeks, and then I went back to get the cast off. They realized the wrist was broken. They needed to reset it, so they rebroke the wrist, recasted me, and then I was in the cast for another 6 weeks. And people asked me, how on earth were you able to paint? And I said to them, I paint because I don't use my fingers to paint. I paint because I can paint because I use my whole arm, you know, and if I'm unstable in a cast, it actually helped. And I also, when it came to drawing, because I had to teach some drawing classes, drawing is a little different because, you know, you do hold a pencil like a pencil, even though sometimes I hold it like a brush. You also hold it like a pencil. And so what I did was I drew with my left hand, and I found that I could draw with my left hand. Who knew? I didn't know. And sometimes to this day, I'll use my left hand to draw. Just, it's different. It's a different kind of drawing that you get. And we actually incorporated a lesson with drawing with the opposite hand because of that experience. It was kind of cool. All right, so there's your light side. Now, once again, the shadow's edge is rather sharp. I see that you're getting a glare here. Let me every once in a while do this so you can see. All right. I can't hold it like this and paint like this because it's at too much of an angle from where I'm sitting. But I will paint it, and every once in a while I'll bring this out so that you can see it that way. Okay, so we've got our light side, we've got our dark side. I'm making a judgment call about my shadow's edge. It's actually not that sharp, it's kind of broken up, so I'm just gonna kind of like tickle my way along here a little bit. And there's also a greenish, darkish area right here that's a natural green in the pear that I'm going to pop in there. And I'm gonna take my light side apple color, and I'm just gonna throw in a little bit here. And it kind of goes down to here. And it's broken up, it's not a solid green, so I'm just gonna tickle it along. Okay, and now for the highlight. Now the highlight on the pear is there's one here and there's one here. So I'm going to pop in that same color of lemon yellow and white. More lemon yellow than white. I should make a note of that. Highlights are never, ever, ever white, because then they become too distracting. One there, there's a little one here, like that. There's actually a little one there too, but that's a little too much, so let's take some of that off. Okay, so there's your pear. Now, let's talk about the shadow. The shadow is the complement of the overall color. So our overall dominant color here is yellow. So it takes yellow to make this apple, and it takes yellow to make this pear. So that means your shadow is going to be purple. It's a weird, wonderful phenomenon that your shadow will often be, if not always, a type of complement, a type of the complement. So it can be a neutralized complement. In this case, that's what it is. It's a neutralized complement. And the complement to yellow is purple. So I'm gonna pop this in here like this. To neutralize the purple, I added some yellow. So if you want to neutralize a color, you add its complement. If you want something to stand out, you put it next to it. Do you see how that really made that stand out? By putting that color there. Now there's going to be reflected lights in here, so what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm just going to knock it in as, okay, this is the shadow area. And I'm going to leave some of it dark and some of it I'll throw in reflected lights. And then I'll also add what we call anchoring lines, which is not one of the 6 lights, but is an important element. So there's the shadow. Don't be afraid of your edges. You know, if it was watercolor, I could understand the fear. You know, acrylic always is a little weird when you go to edges because it's already dry. But with oil paint, it just wants you to go to the edge because everything is wet and then it just harmonizes and just kind of blends beautifully. Okay, there we go. Now, it is still floating a little bit, and the reason why it's floating is because I don't have the anchoring lines in there, which I will put in a second. I'm going to lighten the shadow up a little bit and put it in the back because the back part up here isn't as dark as what's down here. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some of this grisaille to kind of bleed through because I really like the combination of this color with the grisaille. In the shadow I can't because in the shadow I'm going to add, but here I'm just going to leave some of it in there. And I may throw a little bit of light color in there too, but for the most part, I don't want to go too crazy with it up there. I don't want it to be too dark. And if you pick up some yellow, that's okay, because you're using purple. It'll neutralize it out when you put it on. This is a weird angle I'm painting at, so I'm kind of painting a little blind here. And it comes down here. Now down here, this is where it will separate from the shadow. You still want to be on the form. So if the direction is that, then that's the way you want to go. Now I'm painting fairly fast. You can take your time with this. You know, I've painted the apple and pear so many times, I could do it in my sleep. It's kind of like my daughter Lex. There was a point where I was painting her so much I could paint her without her being there. Down here it gets a little bit weird. It gets a little peachy color, which we're also going to add. And up here, we have a little bit here, and then that becomes peach. And then this here is actually a weird dark greenish kind of, it's a blue greenish color up here. That's just the background in the, I'm actually cooling it down more than it is in the photograph because I want it to set back a little bit, and that'll throw it back. All right, so now the next step is to, before I put in the reflected lights here, I'm going to throw in some of the peach, and then I'm going to use that peach to put in the reflected lights. So the reason why I'm using peach is because the blue that's in this purpley color, the peach will be the complement to it. And it will almost feel, you know, it's the same kind of theory, you know, the complement is always there next to it. You just got to find it. I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit in front because it is very light in front. When you're doing cloth, it's good to go fast. And the reason why is because cloth has that feel, you know? It's got that, it's not as, you know, unless it's something that's like really delicate, like satin. This is a, I think it's from an old bed sheet. I have a drawer filled with different cloths that I use for still lifes. Some of them are old scarves that I used to have to wear, and some of them are like old sheets. And white sheets make a great drop because they do have that beautiful purple highlight. I mean, shadows. Okay, now there's some of it's in here, which will add a little bit of dark onto it after, I think, or maybe a little bit of more red. I don't know. Depends on how I feel. And that direction goes that way. And then this in here is there. Okay, now for the reflected lights. There's a wrinkle here, and the wrinkle is picking up some light. And here, and here, and here. Reflected lights and shadows can often, I mean, this is different because it's a cloth, but let's say it's on a table and there's no cloth underneath it and you have a perfectly round shadow. The reflected light will be in the center of that shadow because there's nothing to break it up. And what would happen is the light is going past the object, hitting the wall, and then bouncing back and hitting the cloth. This kind of goes like that. This is also really light, but it's lighter than I just put it on there. So let's, even though this is a white cloth, I don't think of colors in general forms like that. When I see a white cloth, I see a lot of color in it. So I don't say to myself, oh, it's a white cloth, it's got to be white. I see light. I see what the temperature of the light is. And we'll make this light over here, like that. Okay, we still need to get, we still need to get some of that anchoring line in there. I got a little nub here. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so the anchoring line, it's still kind of floating a little bit. Let me turn this so you can see it without her. Here we go. Let's see. Can you see it? It's hard for me to see, but hopefully you can see it. Okay, so we still need to put that anchoring line in because it's still floating a little bit. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take, I personally, for brown at home, like to use sepia. And there's different kinds of sepia. There's a warm sepia, there's a cool sepia. I like to use a warm sepia. It has a tendency towards green. You throw that anchoring line down there to sit that right on the table. And over here, you could also use a type of burnt umber, or you could use a something even a little more redder than that. Like burnt sienna. Just added a little grisaille to my sepia, see what that does. Okay, now the stems. So just like the apple and pear, the stems also have a light side, dark side. And on this stem here, the light side is the tip right here. And on this stem here, the light side is just right about there. Okay, and the rest becomes very dark. So first I'm going to put my dark in. And I'm going to keep it kind of warm. I'm going to take the grisaille color with a little tiny bit of sepia. And for those that are my students, burnt umber. Pop it in like that. Now here's where my shaky hands come in handy. Stems are just like tree branches. Stems are never perfect. They're always a little wiggly. And my hands are a little wiggly, so it works. I also have a tendency to turn my painting around, partly due to the fact that, you know, my hands are so shaky. But a lot of times, and I didn't do it on this because it would be too confusing, is I paint things upside down. And the reason why I paint things upside down is because if it's upside down, I'm not making a judgment call about what it is that I'm looking at. You know, it's just shape and value and temperature and color. All right, let's throw a thing on that. And one down here. And I'm even going to go as far as making that a little bit lighter up here with a little bit of Naples yellow. And there you have it, the apple and pear. And there it is. Okay, so what I'd like is I would like for you to do some of these apples and pears. I will have a link in the on the site to show the picture, and I will, if you could take the Acorn phone number, which is 781-631-6030, and text me your image. We'll put them on our Acorn Facebook and Instagram pages. And if you want to be known who you are, that's fine as far as I'll publish your name. If you don't, just tell me. But please tell me who you are when you send me the pictures so I know what I'm looking at. There were a lot of imperfections in this pair of little spots and stuff like that just from age. I didn't put those in because I didn't want to confuse you, because this assignment is about the 6 lights. It's the light side, the dark side, the shadow's edge, the reflected light, cast, highlight, and cast shadow. That is the foundation to everything that we teach at Acorn. And when you learn how to look for those things, painting becomes so much easier. We will have other lessons on color theory, on how to measure a drawing, and I'm also going to do some lessons specifically for the little kids too, making a puppy, a kitty, some landscapes. And I hope that to have you log on again for my next one. You guys have a safe, healthy, wonderful day.